Hi, friends. Welcome to another edition of Fish Tales with Pat Roach, where I tell you a story. It might be about fishing, or it might just be about something else that I have an interest in. But this time, I'm going to tell you about how I first got into fishing. So, I first got into fishing by going down to visit my grandmother. Now, my grandmother on the Roach side, she was my nana, lived in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. We lived in Dartmouth, just outside of Halifax. And it was probably about, in those days, the old highways, about a 4-hour drive, I bet you, to get down to Yarmouth. And I can remember we'd go down through the valleyway, and we'd stop in this little town called Weymouth. And there was an old Pepsi bottling plant there that it used spring water to make their Pepsi. And the water just overflowed out this nice wellhead, and everyone from miles around would just fill up their water containers and have nice fresh spring water. So that's what we'd do. We'd stop there, we'd grab some water for my nanny with our little containers, those little square kind of plastic water containers with a handle, and bring water down to her. And then on the way home, we'd stop again and fill up for ourselves. But when going to Yarmouth, it's right on the water, on the Atlantic Ocean. There's actually ferries that go down to the United States that go out of Yarmouth. But we'd go walking around, and my dad would take me down for a walk. It's a very small town. And we went down to the docks and the wharfs or whatever, down right on the water. And there was all these guys there sitting on the wharf on the edge, which was pretty high. It was probably like 10 feet high above the water. And they had little hand lines just that went over their finger. And some of them had a little thing to cover their finger. It looked like a bigger version of like a thimble. It looked like a finger condom, actually, kind of. And then they just have that hanging down. It would go straight down right by the wharf, and then they'd feel a fish tug, and they'd just go like that, and then they'd just pull that whole line up, no fishing rod or anything, and they caught a lot of pollock. And they were big. They were probably a good foot long, for maybe a foot and a half long, and anyways, that they would keep them and eat them. And I said, Dad, would you ever eat those? He says, no, I don't think I would. I like fish that come from deeper water. So that down that way, that's where the Atlantic Ocean is very cold, and some of the best lobsters, the rock bottom waters, ice cold waters. Some folks say that the best tasting lobsters are from that area because the water's so cold. So anyway, that's when I first started and saw fishing. And then my dad took me out a couple times down on our cottage. We had a little 12-foot aluminum boat, which I still use to this day. It's still, I can't believe it. That thing's it's 40 years old. And it's still, it's got holes in it that have been fixed and aluminum welded and everything. A Springbok aluminum boat, but it still works good. And then at that time, we had a 1.2 horsepower Sears and Roebuck engine. And it was an air-cooled engine. It took 2.5 cups of gas. You'd have to mix the gas for it. But it didn't need water to cool it. And you could pick it up with your pinky finger just on the motor housing. Just lift it up. It was that light. So we went all the way up our lake. And obviously at a 1.2 horsepower, we did not go very fast, but we puttered up the lake at the cottage, and we went to a river, and right in front of that river, that's where we caught some fish. At that time, actually, we caught some trout. So that was fun to do that with my father, but he really didn't get too much into fishing. He did it once in a while, but it was years later, like when I was 12, I hung out with a buddy named Dean Steinberg, and we'd go out on Porter's Lake, and I'm still buddies with Dino. I call him Dino. To this day, we'd go out on Porter's Lake, and we'd try to fish. We wouldn't catch anything, but we'd try. And I remember he had this really cool fillet knife that was his dad's, and he said, this is a fillet knife that won't sink. It's a floating fillet knife. And I said, oh, that's cool. It had like a sheath in it, almost like a samurai sword, but a lot smaller, obviously, because it's a fillet knife. And when he took it out of the sheath, and I was looking at it, and I said, "Geez, this looks really cool." I said, "I wonder if it would float without that sheath on it." And Dino said, "I don't know. Probably. It's a floating knife." So he put it over the side of the boat and let it go, and it sunk to the bottom. Well, he freaked out. He said, "Why did you make me do that?" I said, "I didn't make you. I just said I wonder if it floated." And you were the curious guy, and you decided to try to put it in the water, but it did not float. So, anyways, I wasn't catching fish back in those days. But then I went out with a buddy of mine. He's a DJ here on the rock station called Q104, the Rock of the Atlantic. And his name's Bobby McDonald, and his nickname is Bobby Mac. So he took me out on his little fishing boat, and he's the guy that showed me like the wacky rig, and that's set up, and we started to catch some fish, and we just had a lot of fun. And ever since then, ever since we came to some different lakes, and he showed me the ways to catch. I don't mind if the fish are small, that's fine. If you're catching fish, you're having a good time. You don't always have to catch, obviously, but just being out is great. But when you do catch it, it raises the excitement level. So I'm gonna have to get Bobby out on this boat sometime and do a little fish with him. But thanks to him, he showed me how to fish. And then my buddy Rob, I call him the Ninja. He was selling this boat because he came across a new to him bass boat that was newer than this one and a bit bigger. So he sold me this one, and I've been loving it ever since. It's just a hoot. So if you haven't tried fishing, get out there and try fishing. It's just a ton of fun. So anyways, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Fish Tales. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great day.